I won't pretend I've supposedly been active much on the internet, at least in terms of publicly posting my opinions, my political beliefs. I was for a time, a very long time in fact, far too long, if you ask me. I was so consumed with whichever political ideology or set of ideologies I adhered to at the time, it was all I cared about, as well as all I ever shared online. On my social media accounts and my old now deleted channels on YouTube and alternative video sharing sites, they all exclusively focused on this ideology, on me expressing my dissenting views. A lot of the time, they were controversial, even by internet standards. Even with all the heated discussion and debates and all the years lost to misery to hang on to something that never mattered, with all the family ties severed by so many people as a result of differing beliefs, it took me longer than most to realize how dangerous being consumed was. I changed my beliefs so much, so many times and so often, that to have been so passionate about one thing for so long, only to abandon it for another thing, only to then abandon that for another thing, and never recognize the monumental mistake I was continually making, that was my problem. My voluntarily consumed poison. Now, looking back at all of it, I feel I can't quite, at least altogether, leave ideology. Everything is ideological, political, at the end of the day. However, it shouldn't be my primary focus in life. Unless you're literally a politician, at least a Bernie Sanders-style politician anyway, like a good politician, or a philosopher, like a good philosopher, like Peter Kropotkin or George Sorel. There's no reason, no real incentive one truly has to make politics the fundamental basis of their existence, or even just their work. Yes, I haven't been publicly posting my beliefs online that often. Not at all. Not even on my various social media accounts. I just have far more serious things to be concerned about. And, well, truly, I now I'll likely just forget everything I've written all over again. I was so dedicated, unbelievably convinced of a certain political position, an ideological view, or system of beliefs being correct. Learning it wasn't the truth, it just tore me apart. And over again, depressingly. My lack of public posting might even give some people the impression that I don't change my mind as often anymore. But truth be told, this is actually the opposite of the case. The inverse reality. It's actually because I change my mind so much now, even more nowadays than ever before, as difficult as it may be to imagine for y'all, that I don't post my ever-changing beliefs publicly. Why would I possibly do that? Type out a whole 12,000 word essay, only to regret it, change my mind largely or entirely, the following week. What would be the point? You probably can't even guess what I believe now. I mean, I'm a progressive of some sort, I value equality, and at least lately I think I'd be more leftist than I ever have in years. But still, you never had the quarter of it, or the sheer amount of times I've gone back and forth, flipped, and even flopped. I'll confess the glaring truth, even if everyone already suspected this, just to leave no doubt in anyone's mind. I switched from about every ideology, both major and obscure, sometimes even back and forth multiple times, and have believed nearly everything that anyone can even believe. With all this change and all this willingness to change, to modify what I think, to reconsider what is and isn't true, it should be obvious as to why I don't have that much faith in public posting. I would just disappoint myself yet again when my mind expectantly shifts into another gear. What I do find interesting, however, are the few, albeit rare, things that have never changed about myself. The things I've always believed, being for or against, without time modifying this. Maybe these things won't be too conflicting, no matter how much I express such beliefs. I wouldn't mind even talking about why I'm for or against the things I've always consistently and unchangingly been for or against. Certain truths I've always been passionate for. But it's just so obvious and real to me that I could never go back on. Things like that are absolutely amazing, and I'd sometimes short of breath when I recognize, even internally, the unchanging nature of these patterns. It brings me to a more intimate time in my life, or at least a more intimate element of myself, something that's always been reflective of the type of person, the type of man that I am. But I get this question. I get this question far too often. People ask me what I believe about this or that, some specific ideological position. However, they also ask me how I'm even able to change my mind so often, so frequently. When I began abandoning my old channel, Visionary Oaks, people were accusing me of being a grifter, basically. How could someone who had consistently been posting anarchist, communist, and general leftist content for 8 straight months, suddenly in the span of a few days, come to some alternative conclusion about what was at the time racial stuff? And I don't agree with any of my statements, none at all. I made while leaving that account and that persona on racial subjects, racial controversies. I am as progressive as they arrive. No different from the Black Panther Party stance on the problems of America today. Nonetheless, people were confused. They couldn't believe someone would change their mind in a mere matter of days. I would say I don't understand how this mentality is brewed, let alone is able to subsist. However, unlike them, I actually think about things. I think about why people believe in a certain thing. I try to see things from others' point of view, no matter how twisted it is. And that's not to say I ever endorse their worldview. Far from it. I understand it to dissect it, so I can do that. Explain the inherent problems with this corrupt way of thinking and perceiving matters. The true reason people find it infeasible, my frequent changing of my beliefs, is that they themselves never changed theirs. They're stubborn. They don't want to change. They don't want to realize that what they've believed has all been incorrect. Shattering their worldview would mean shattering who they are, or better phrased, who they were as a person, as a human. They attach their ideology to themselves so strongly that becomes their whole personality, their identity. Without it, if it were to happen to be taken away, they consider themselves to have nothing. The highest level of intellectual and spiritual poverty. But do realize it can only be voluntarily taken away, hence why so few people actually alter their beliefs. Nobody can literally change your mind for you. You can only do it on your own. You have to be willing, allowing, in order for your mindset to alter. I've changed my mind, and changed my mind so often because I care. I care about what's the truth. If I didn't, I wouldn't have ever been interested in politics at all. I would have just talked about, shows, or music, or films, or whatever. Actually, maybe I should have done that honestly, reflecting upon it. Yet another example of changing my mind. If you can't comprehend something as basic and essential as regret, something that should be universally experienced in order for someone to learn and mature, the very basis of character development, how can you expect to accomplish anything in any type of field? How can you be a business strategist, a financial advisor, or at the highest hierarchy, a corporate manager? If you can't reflect upon your mistakes, can't even acknowledge them to begin with, you're never going to help any individual or company achieve progress. How can you be a good video game designer? You think you're always correct every single action, the game's just going to receive a terrible reception. You need to see what you're doing wrong in order to do things right. How can you be a father? Seriously, that's not a joke question. If you can't even admit when you've made a parenting mistake, how are you supposed to do better next time? If you've never apologized to your child or children, you're never going to set the ideal example for them. They'll just grow up to repeat the cycle of mistreatment. I guess that really highlights it, the problem at hand. The reason people so rarely change their worldview is the same reason parents rarely apologize to their kids, if at all. They think it's an admission of weakness. They're convinced that pretending they're always perfect without flaws makes them look better. Really? It's all a facade. If you're aware that you have problems, attempting to conceal it just makes things even worse. The fact that I've switched ideologies so many times is just evidence of caring. Not necessarily that I was right about things, in fact, that a lot of the time I wasn't, that their admission being the central focus of why I've abandoned some beliefs in exchange for others. However, it doesn't subtract from me as a person having been wrong, but rather just the ideology itself. It means the beliefs were wrong, were objectively incorrect. It doesn't imply anything external, and that's the heart of why some people are so stubborn. They tie their own ideology to their own self-worth. Leaving the cult or movement behind means, in their eyes, leaving themselves, becoming someone new. Listen, I've changed my mind about it as many times as I don't even know what comparison to make here. And yet, in spite of everything, it's still me. It's still the same person, just a normal man at the end of the day. And there have been qualities and traits of myself that are, as a distinct reflection of who I've always been, unchanging. Fixed, static. Portions of a person, the way they interact with the world, sense and experience life, they're often the least likely to change over time. It's arbitrary beliefs, however, like thinking you need something that you don't even desire, like a white ethno-state or even a white ethno-enclave. Beliefs that betray what you really want, who you truly are as a person, that need to be turned off, replaced. You're effectively and repeatedly building yourself up only to inevitably tear yourself down when you realize how much none of this jazz even mattered, even ever mattered. Like, it never mattered. And remember, even though this isn't my own quote, it's still the truth. The price of hating other human beings is loving oneself less. No different from the Black Panther Party's stance on the problems of America today. No different from the Black Panther